Let's take a closer look at a painting called Coles Lane, Dublin by Limerick-born artist Fergus O'Ryan. Painted in the late 1930s or early 40s, this painting is part of the permanent collection of Dublin's Hugh Lane Gallery, having been acquired in 1945. My name is Claire Crowley, and for the next 30 minutes or so, I'm going to use this lovely painting of a bustling Dublin street scene as a jumping-off point to briefly explore the long tradition of markets and street traders in Dublin, and to consider the role that artists like Fergus O'Ryan played in documenting the changing city and its traditional trades and professions. Maybe some of the place names I mention, or the photographs I'm going to show, will trigger your own memories of Dublin or your own hometown and its people and traditions. First, let's take a closer look at the painting, which I should point out is not currently on display in the Hugh Lane Gallery, but you'll find it online in the gallery's online collection. The painting is fairly substantial in size, about 50 by 40 centimetres, so almost square, and it captures an everyday moment of a street market in Dublin. The painter, Fergus O'Ryan, is known for his atmospheric street scenes and landscapes, painted with loose brushwork and textured areas of impasto laid on using a palette knife. His loose, sketchy technique lends this picture a lively sense of movement and energy, suitable for a busy market scene. We seem to have an ever so slightly elevated view of a pedestrianised urban laneway that leads towards a T-junction, and the scene is bustling with people. We get the sense that this is a very built-up area, maybe slightly claustrophobic, with narrow lanes flanked by tall red brick buildings. There's no visible horizon line in the picture, just a tiny patch of sky is apparent in the top left. A sunny day is suggested by a bright patch of sunlight illuminating the stall awning on the left-hand side, but it seems that the light can't penetrate further down to street level in this built-up urban area. We can tell that it's a street market from the canopies or awnings jutting out from the buildings, offering protection from the elements to the stallholders and dealers and customers below. One shawled woman in the left foreground appears to be selling textiles that are piled high on a table in front of her, and there are clothes hanging from the awnings behind. In the right foreground, another shawled woman seems to be selling from a basket of produce, maybe fruit or vegetables or flowers, at her feet. As I looked closer at the details of this painting, I recalled my own vivid memories of travelling to Dublin as a child and hearing the street traders of Moore Street and Mary Street calling out their catchphrases in sing-song voices and selling everything and anything from their old-fashioned prams. Also the newspaper hawker selling the Evening Herald at the traffic lights near the Dublin City Council buildings on Wood Quay. There's a really long tradition in Dublin, stretching back centuries, of markets just like this. From Patrick Street and the Liberties on the south side, to Smithfield and the Ormond Market on the north side. These markets and trading areas were hives of activity, where Dubliners could find everything from meat and vegetables and fruit, to overcoats, leather boots, furniture and rags, all accompanied by the sing-song voices of the traders and hawkers. An early visual record of this tradition that I came across in my research is this fascinating illustrated broadsheet, printed in Dublin around 1775, entitled The Dublin Cries, or a representation of the various cries and callings throughout the streets, lanes and alleys of the city and liberties of Dublin. At the bottom of the sheet it states, Dublin, printed by G. Powell in Green Street, opposite New Prison, and sold by D. Carpenter in Newry. This is a really large print, measuring 53 by 40.5 centimetres, and features 20 woodcuts of Dublin street dealers, each carrying their products and wares, and each accompanied by an inscription of their own cry or catchphrase. There's a butter dealer, potato seller, a turfmonger, amongst others, and I'll just highlight a couple here. Here's the fishmonger, like the character from the old song Molly Malone. She holds a large basket of fish in front of her and calls out, "Fresh herrings, large Dublin Bay herrings, alive here. Here's a large fresh cod, alive here. Here's large soles or places, alive," or fine Boyne salmon. I'm assuming the term alive is used to convey the freshness of the fish, and so I suppose the Boyne salmon having to be imported into the city was not quite as fresh as the Dublin Bay catch. Here the curds and whey dealer is shown balancing a container on her head as she cries out, "Buy sweet whey, buy the pure sweet whey, hard cruds here, hard cruds for the boys and girls." This lovely print from the late 18th century illustrates that there has long been an interest in depictions of Dublin street characters and dealers, and it's a great record of some of their distinctive catchphrases and products. Moving into the 19th century, the sights and sounds and smells of Dublin and its markets are mentioned by writers of guidebooks and visitors to the city, as well as recorded visually by artists. There's a great description of this in Dr. Catherine Milligan's book, Painting Dublin, including an account of the writer Charles Dickens' visit to Dublin in 1853. Dickens apparently walked around the markets in the Coombe and near St. Patrick's Cathedral on the south side of the city, and writing about Patrick Street, he said, "One side is occupied by a manifestation of the old clothes interest, the other by a continuous line of stalls for the sale of butcher's meat and provisions in general, the stalls being overshadowed by projecting bulkheads, prodigiously productive of chiaroscuro, picturesqueness, rottenness, and dinginess." This is a great description of what was probably an assault on the senses for any visitor to the area, with the mingling aromas from the stalls and horses and slaughterhouses, and the sounds of the traders calling out, the clatter of cartwheels on the cobblestones, and the claustrophobic clutter of stalls and awnings and baskets and people. The scene that Dickens described is illustrated in this wonderful photograph of Patrick Street, dating to the late 1800s. In the background, the spire of St. Patrick's Cathedral rises into the sky. The street is much narrower than it is today, and it's lined with stalls and people and horses and carts, as well as wooden canopies or projecting bulkheads, as Dickens called them. The same street is captured in this beautiful genre scene painted by Irish artist Walter Frederick Osborne, called The Fish Market, Patrick Street, and this painting is in the permanent collection of the Hugh Lane Gallery. In the painting you can see a fish stall and fishmonger in the foreground. In the left background a woman sells hats piled up high on a table, while in the centre sides of meat can be seen hanging at a butcher's stall, and at the right a stall with baskets hanging from the overhead canopy. In the 1890s, the painter Osborne spent a lot of time sketching such scenes of everyday life in the market area around Patrick Street, in the Liberties on the south side of Dublin City. He used these sketches as source material for his oil paintings, but he also had a collection of photographs of Dublin that he drew on for inspiration. The photograph we were just looking at is on the left here, and it's from Osborne's personal collection of photographs, which is now housed in the Irish Art Archive of the National Gallery of Ireland. And it's clear that Osborne used it as a source for the composition of his painting on the right, which is titled St. Patrick's Close, Dublin. He added in some additional figures, such as the boy playing the tin whistle in the foreground, but overall the composition is an exact copy of the photograph. It's unknown if Osborne was the photographer or if he collected other people's photographs to use as potential source material. These paintings by Osborne, as well as his photograph collection, are wonderful documents of a part of the city that has changed drastically in the intervening years. Even if his paintings are sanitized to suit the tastes of his audience, who are interested in picturesque depictions of hardworking, poverty-stricken women and children, rather than the stark reality of the conditions that these people were living and working in. But what about the market captured in Fergus O'Ryan's painting, Coles Lane? That was what was located on the north side of the city, and sadly, if you go looking for it today, this is what you'll find. A sad, truncated lane leading from Henry Street up to a side entrance into the Ilac shopping centre, in between Dunn Stores on the right and the vacant building that used to house Debenhams and the Forest Roches Stores on the left. The Ilac shopping centre opened in 1981, and to make way for its development, an 8-acre site was cleared, an area that was once a warren of lanes and alleys and marketplaces, including Coles Lane. Starting in 1968, Dublin Corporation began to condemn the markets in this area as unhygienic, and over several years began to compulsory purchase and demolish property until they had a large empty site stretching between Henry Street and Parnell Street and Moore Street. They sold the site to Irish Life Assurance Company to build a shopping centre, and the developer's initials, ILAC, were used to name the new shopping centre, the first of its kind in the city centre. This is a photograph showing the Parnell Street side of the Ilac Centre in 1987, looking eastwards towards O'Connell Street. To understand what Coles Lane and the whole area looked like before this redevelopment, we can turn to old maps, including John Rock's exact survey of the city and suburbs of Dublin, which dates to 1756. Here, circled in red, we can see that Coles Lane was a fairly significant artery running parallel with Moore Street to the right, leading from Henry Street northwards to Parnell Street, which was then known as Great Britain Street, and it pops out almost opposite where Dominic Street joins Parnell Street today. This detail of a map from 1891 gives us a good view of the warren of streets and lanes running off Coles Lane that were swallowed up by the development of the Ilac. These once thriving alleys and lanes had wonderfully evocative names like Horseman's Row, Mason's Market, Riddle's Row, Sampson Place, McCann's Lane, Moore Place, Rotunda Market, Denmark Place, and Denmark Street. Coles Lane is listed in Thom's Directory of 1862 as having a wide range of merchants and traders working along its length, including timber stores, vintners, rag and bone yards, poulterers, grocers and spirit dealers, hairdressers, cabinet makers and chair makers. Also listed are tenements and ruins, revealing how most of these traders lived in very difficult conditions in run-down tenement buildings behind their stalls. These photographs from 1913 give us a sense of the conditions that people were working and living in along Coles Lane. These are views of the stalls and markets in the laneway, and there's lots of similarities with Fergus O'Ryan's paintings. The overhanging canopies, clothes hanging, tables piled with textiles and shoes and hats, and furniture. It did seem to be a bit more cluttered back at the turn of the century though, with bed frames and furniture also out on the streets. This street clutter was referenced in the newspapers over the years. In the Irish Times newspaper archive, I found a letter sent in by one outraged reader in September 1880, complaining about the state of Coles Lane. He wrote, "Will you kindly allow me to call attention to the condition of Coles Lane? It is almost impossible to pass through it, owing to the dealers in old furniture occupying the footway and street with old bedsteads, tables and chairs." Another sensitive letter writer a year later wrote, "I had the occasion to go through Coles Lane this morning, and the stench that came from it is enough to breed a plague." Over the decades, Coles Lane was predominantly known for dealers selling second-hand furniture and second-hand clothing. It was primarily women who worked as street dealers, often widows who were the primary breadwinners for their families. The trade was passed down through generations, and according to oral histories, multiple generations would work together, with babies sometimes sleeping in baskets or banana boxes and children being put to work as soon as they were old enough. The women would buy their wares in bundles at church jumble sales or pawnbrokers' auctions, and then spend their days trying to entice shoppers in with their sing-song catchphrases. It wasn't just Fergus O'Ryan who was drawn to this vibrant part of Dublin town. Whether driven by a sense of nostalgia for a changing city or a desire to observe and capture daily life in Dublin, other artists like Harry Kurnoff and Flora Mitchell and Neville Johnson, amongst others, wandered the lanes and alleys of this patch of Dublin, photographing and sketching and painting its buildings and people. And Fergus O'Ryan also painted other lanes in this area, including these two undated views of Horseman's Row, the one on the left with a very dark and foreboding sky. And Orion always titled his work with the name of the location depicted, so he was obviously very interested in the sense of place unique to each street and patch of the city. In 1943, he made a beautiful series of black and white woodcut and linocut prints of old Dublin streets and buildings. These were turned into Christmas card designs printed by Cluna Studio. Here's a view of the old Dublin walls on Cook Street at the back of St. Auden's Church, and on the right, a view through the door of a Georgian house, which reminds me of a Dutch 17th century genre scene with a vista through a doorway or down passageways. Here are two views of a bookstall in the Ormond Market, which once stood on Ormond Quay Upper near the forecourts. We can see only men at this stall, dressed in hats and overcoats, browsing the books, in contrast to the mostly female customers that are shown in pictures of clothing stalls and food markets in the area. I really love these graphic works by Fergus Orion. He was obviously a very confident printmaker. His use of line and texture is striking, capturing a real sense of the atmosphere and light and activity in these locations. And so it's no surprise that he started out as a graphic designer and made a living as one for many years. He studied pictorial design in his hometown of Limerick in Limerick School of Art in the early 1930s, before moving to Dublin, where he enrolled in the Metropolitan School of Art. In the 1940s and 50s, he worked as a designer in the Theatre Royal on Hawkins Street in Dublin, in the art department, designing stage backdrops, posters and programmes. Sadly, I couldn't find definitive examples of his work for the theatre, but this 1951 poster for a performance by Judy Garland dates to his time working there, so it's possible he was potentially involved in its production. I did, however, find some other examples of his graphic design work, including, on the left, black and white illustrations for Patricia Lynch's 1952 book, Tales of Irish Enchantment. In the middle, a commemorative stamp to mark the festival called An Tostal in 1953, and on the right, a book cover for Joseph Brady's book In Manavala, published in 1963. In the 1950s, 60s and 70s, Fergus Orion also worked for Caps Publicity, a Dublin advertising agency, and he designed posters and advertising campaigns for Irish hospital sweepstakes. These playful designs were created using scraper board, which involved scratching a design into dark ink. These examples are housed in the collection of NIVAL, the National Irish Visual Arts Library in NCAD. And Orion actually ended up in NCAD himself as a teacher of printmaking, lettering and graphic design, and he worked there for many years. And all the while, Orion was still painting and exhibiting, not just scenes of Dublin, but of Connemara and Wicklow and wider Europe. He and his wife were intrepid explorers, going on days-long treks around Wicklow and Connemara, as well as travelling further afield to France, Italy, the Greek islands and Venice, to name just a few locations. All the while, Orion was sketching and painting on plein air. He exhibited widely, including at the first Irish exhibition of living art, organised by Mamie Jellett in 1943, and he held solo shows at the Victor Waddington Galleries in 1950 and 54, as well as participating in many other group shows. Beginning in 1938, he exhibited almost yearly at the RHA annual exhibition, with his final tally coming in at 200 works exhibited there. He became a full member of the RHA in 1960. In 2021, Adams Auction House in Dublin held a large sale of Fergus Orion's work, and the online catalogue gives us a great sense of his travels and his output. According to Adams auctioneer James O'Halloran, and I quote, "Orion could sell his paintings at the drop of a hat because they appeal to such a wide cross-section of society. They don't ask a great deal of the viewer, and there's a huge demand for visually appealing landscapes." Apparently, Orion's paintings were very popular as relatively affordable presents for weddings and retirements and anniversaries. Fergus Orion passed away in 1989 at the age of 78. leaving behind a significant legacy as a graphic designer, illustrator, printmaker, art educator, painter, and intrepid traveller. And this unassuming painting in the collection of the Hugh Lane Gallery in Dublin is a lovely reminder of this hard-working artist, as well as a record of a vanished part of Dublin city. For details of Hugh Lane Gallery programmes and events, including coffee conversation talks, see the gallery's website.